Right.
Ready.
Welcome to the Healthy Brain, Healthy Mind podcast interview. I'm Dr. J. Kumar, Dr. J, or even J is fine as well, the Director of Wellbeing at Chapman University. And for those of you who are tuning in for the first time on this, I decided to resurrect the Healthy Brain, Healthy Mind series, which I began last year right after COVID, as a resource for helping our Chapman community to deal in the aftermath and coping with a lot of the mental health, I think struggles that we had during COVID. And I'm the Director of Wellbeing here at Chapman. I also teach here at Chapman University. I'm known as for teaching the happiness course every spring semester, which I'm doing right now. So students, the happiness course, you'll be hearing this, I'm sure. But I want to kind of share before we're going to be our first, I'm delighted to have our first guest on this 4-part series, Dr. Andrew Kami, or Andrew, as I'll call it, so we're friends. But I think it's really important. I share with our listeners, I think, what inspired me to get on this journey and really talk about mental health, because, May is Mental Health Awareness Month. And I share very openly my book, Science for a Happy Brain. At the very opening of it, I talk about I was that person, that student all throughout high school and college who was like, overachiever, straight A, went to the top universities, blah, 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 had the right resumes. And my first year at my PhD program at UCLA, that summer, I received a phone call from my dad saying that my mother had died from suicide. And it was a traumatic event that really, I think, caused a lot of soul searching. And I think it really, I'm going to say this, I think, to our listeners, because it's very important, that it's sometimes through our struggle, we can find our sense of through our pain, a sense of purpose. Through our strife, we can find a deeper sense of meaning, or like that idea of growing from grief. And so I'd like to maybe just start off this series by really talking about how it's important to recognize that mental health is a core component of our well-being, and removing the shame and stigma. I'm very frank. I was very going back almost 20 years now, when my mother died from suicide. There was a lot of stigma and shame around it. And I think coming especially from the model minority perspective, that added that component to it as well. There was that sense of shame and maybe a sense of stigma around it. But we're talking here openly about mental health issues. And so I struggled with my mental health through college, like many students do here today, and then many of us through life, and especially after my mother's suicide. It was very painful, and I had to go through a long, arduous journey of healing, spiritual, mental, emotional healing. Yeah, absolutely. And so, but here we are today. Here I am now helping not just our students at Chapman, but I think a wide audience, our community, but also a wider, internet audience or global audience now, since we are pretty much global these days with the internet. So this is the segue into, our interview with Andrew, Dr. Kami today. And the title for today's the title for today's podcast, the debut podcast, is Learning to Rehumanize. How we overcome the impact of the COVID pandemic and on our mental health, but also the importance of how do we begin that very important rehumanization process? How do we begin to return to not only in-person learning, but in-person living? So I'd like to just introduce very briefly Dr. Andrew Kami. He's the Director of Psychological and Counseling Services here at Chapman. He's also a military veteran, which, I knew that, but I think many of our listeners might be interested. What I didn't know is that you're bicultural.
Yes, I am.
Mexican and Japanese.
Right down the middle.
That's incredible.
I can talk a little bit more about
I'd love to, And he takes pride in coming from East Los Angeles, Boyle Heights, since we all take pride in our roots. Communities are roots, very important. And you actually are fluent in Japanese and Spanish.
I always hesitate. I do therapy in Spanish, and I do therapy in Japanese.
Oh.
But I always hesitate with saying I'm completely fluent.
Well, if you can do counseling in all 3 languages.
Well, the good thing about therapy is I just sit back and let them do the work.
There you go, right? You just listen. Google Translate in the background. But Andrew enjoys watching baseball. We have a love of baseball. I didn't know that. That's great. Martial arts, looking at art, riding his motorcycle, and eating way more than necessary, especially during pandemic, COVID, right?
Yeah, I got my quarantine body like a lot of you probably out there.
Yeah. Do you like to cook?
I do like to cook. I like to cook.
Is
I like
cooking
doing a whole bunch of different things. I wouldn't say I'm a good cook.
Okay.
But I do like it. I do enjoy doing those kind of things.
Do you find cooking is therapeutic?
I think it can be. Okay. Depending on like, and as we kind of go along, I think there's other things to sit with, which is, oh boy, finding the things that is your therapy. Yeah. It's kind of like a bigger statement. Finding the things that are your therapy. Be it cooking, be it exercise, be it looking at art, whatever it may be. Yeah, I think that's a big discussion to have. Yeah, we'll talk about that. It's really good. So I asked you a question because I'm a big fan of I love languages and learning the origins of words. So my last name Kumar means like prince or young boy in Hindi and Sanskrit. What is Kami Japanese? Kami is Japanese. Kami is it comes for those Japanese majors out there. It comes from the kanji UE, which is from above. And so, oh gosh, there's a lot of story back there. I can certainly jump into it a little bit as we get going, but it comes from the kanji and some of the history that I've gathered from my last name. I think way too many of us have watched anime, and we kind of make the association of Kami being God, but it's not written that way. It's written as a what seems to be an add-on, to other words. So there's some research I've done that it looks like it was perhaps a longer last name that got shortened to Kami, but I really don't know. All right, well, just thought I'd ask. Yeah. So I'd like to maybe ask you, Andrew, we talked a little about your background. Like you were in the military. What branch of the military were you in? I was in the Marine Corps. Nice. Yeah. So and I can just kind of jump into this first one. I really enjoy telling stories. Tell us your story. Really, being in psychology, one of the main things is reflection. Good reflection, being able to recognize who you are, where you're from, and the things that you carry. And so telling stories, what has made you who you are today is an important part of being a good therapist. So let me chat a little bit about my background. One thing I take pride in, East Los Angeles, Boyle Heights. The story goes, and you'll see what I mean. The story goes, my father, Japanese, immigrated from Japan to Mexico. Met my mom in Mexico, in a city called Puebla, which is a bigger city south of Mexico City. And they didn't speak each other's languages. They spoke one language, the language of love, of course, and amor. Right. And my two older sisters and myself were born of this beautiful relationship, him Japanese, her Mexican. They immigrated here technically to Watsonville, a small little town. I think I can recall going there maybe once or twice growing up. A small little town in central California, where she and he, without knowing too much history, and you'll see why, were in the community there. My mom would tell me stories about being in fields, but my memory's fuzzy about that. They eventually they eventually moved down to East Los Angeles, Boyle Heights area. And that's where I'm from, so that's where I was born. So being born in that sort of culture, it's a very interesting, how do you describe this? Boyle Heights, for its history, has beautiful roots to a number of communities, Russian communities, Japanese communities, and now Latino communities, of course. And so I think they settled there because it was close enough to Little Tokyo for my dad to get to Little Tokyo in Los Angeles, but it was still in the Latino community. So growing up, I was happily and burdened with the translator in many ways of the family. So kind of listening to one language and then translating it. And so I was a little delayed in some of the language stuff. And even now, I sometimes find myself kind of stumbling over language at times and kind of going through it in my head. In any case, so growing up in East LA in Boyle Heights, it was a different, I want to describe it. it's a very interesting community. My two older sisters, I had one that passed away from a drug overdose, and another one who was lost to gang violence. So they were older than me. They were a good 8 years older than I was. And so when I was 8, I lost my two older sisters. Now that was an interesting thought. I didn't really understand death so much at the time. I didn't really quite understand. I was torn between, two perspectives, two worlds. One with my dad saying, "Hey, don't worry, they'll be back." I'm conjuring up images of butterflies and resurrection stories, and reincarnation. And then you had my mom, who we had an altar at home. She would pray to this altar. I would pray to her for anything. We would just pray. Life was a little tough at the time. I said we moved to East LA, but we technically moved in and out of hotel rooms in East LA. So my mom, father, and I, we lived in different places. And I couldn't really tell you exactly where. It was just different hotels, different people's homes. It's kind of a mixed memory if I think about it. Now, from there, as we're kind of telling our stories, from there, my mom and I can recall very specifically, would often go out and beg for money. We would panhandle looking for things.
Right.
And so she was really sick. And I remember one time she got really sick. We went to the hospital. Ended up finding out that she had lupus. And so it's autoimmune disease. Unfortunately, she ended up dying when I was 10. And so it was a few years of just going in and out of hospitals, trying to work. She had insurance, there was nothing like that. So I remember her being stressed out about going to the hospital, because how would it be?
Yeah, the financial anxiety.
Now, without knowing more, my father ended up killing himself a couple of weeks after that. So to your story, which I'm very thankful, I certainly can understand a part of it from my own perspective. So about the age of 10, I was on my own. My two sisters had passed, my mother from lupus and my father from suicide. So it was a very interesting time, very interesting time.
That is a very powerful story. And I'm so honored that you would share this with us, in such a way, because I think it really underscores this idea of resilience. And I know that's a buzzword these days, resilience, but I think it really is, there's something, but it's true. So you experienced some pretty profound trauma. When I say trauma, I mean, in the general sense, grief and loss, and suffering.
It's what we call complex trauma. So
complex trauma, yes.
This is complex trauma in its very purest form, which is ongoing traumas on top of one another without really working through them as a whole.
So I think this is a really great opportunity to talk about the importance of mental health. This is the focus of these interviews. This podcast is really for May's Mental Health Awareness Month. Tell me about the struggles maybe that you experienced in the aftermath of this complex trauma. You had one sister die from an overdose, one from gang violence, a mother to lupus, and a father to suicide.
That's right.
Incredible. And so you're all by yourself at the age of 10.
I am. At the age of 10, I'm on my own. There's a social worker who came into the hospital. Excuse me. I've been through a lot of therapy, everybody. Don't worry, we're good. We're good.
Same here.
We're good. But
and we're backstage, by the way. So it's why we're doing this in person.
So, social worker comes in, and I didn't really understand what a social worker was. I just knew that I had seen them before. My memory kind of goes in and out of being pulled in and out of different group homes, staying in different foster homes, and it was a very interesting time. Eventually, I found my way to a foster home that I was consistent in, and this foster home was in Boyle Heights, and I stayed there the last few years of high school, and was very lucky to find some element of safety, something. So I was very lucky there. I went to a large high school. So my high school at the time was the largest in population. We had about 5,000 students as a high school. It's called Roosevelt High School. So any of you know that in East LA, Boyle Heights area. And so from there, things got a little interesting. I was lucky to get into an undergraduate school called Occidental, a small little liberal arts school in Eagle Rock. But boy, was it expensive. And not having any family for co-signing things, not having any funds available, what was one of the only ways I could think to pay for school? Well, you join the Marine Corps, you join the military, right? So I joined the Marine Corps, 2001. 5/5/2001. Right, you can think of the timing. And,
what happened 4 months later?
Right, and I did not, who could even guess these kinds of things?
Right.
And I remember joining the military, joining the Marine Corps specifically, because at the time, they were the ones that were willing to take me in, because what I can remember, they were offering the most money at the time. So joined the Marine Corps. And as I joined the Marine Corps, 5 months later, we have the events of 9/11. And there I found myself in and out of my undergraduate career, going to training, boot camp, serving in the Marine Corps, and doing any number of transitions back and forth between my service and back to school, and submitting work sometimes from away from the state, away from country, and having to send things in order to meet what needed to be done. And that in itself is a whole different story, and I can get into the whole stories about that as well.
Well, let's talk about something. You work towards safety, which is something that I talk about a lot in the courses I teach, also in my research in the book Science of a Happy Brain. Like, I talk about our survival brain, how our survival brain is primed and evolved for seeking safety, security, and stability.
Yes.
And so I like to kind of phrase this idea that our brains really aren't wired in some way for happiness or well-being. It's primed for survival. We can overcome these primal survival-based drives that we have. And I think there's a strategy we can do. And so another concept, which I think, is relevant for this conversation, that we have the survival brain, but the research that I do and you do as well, I look at the brain fundamentally as a social organ. That evolved for community, sense of belonging, connection. I think about, if you think about it, imagine yourself going back 10,000 years ago. It's your ancient tribal and Stone Age tribe time, and you're all by yourself. You're cold, you're hungry. All you want to seek is like a warm cave and some food the next day. Would your chances for survival increase if you had one other able-bodied person you trusted? The pretty answer is yes. And you had 50, 100. You now have the base of what we call tribe, or sense of connection. And so we humans are social creatures. We're not the strongest, we're not the fastest, we're not the tallest, we can't breathe in the water, but we surpassed in the ability to form the complex social groups.
That's right.
Did you find that going into the military was your way of finding a sense of community and belonging? Or is that like a sense of, in some way, a sense of, I mean, there are economic reasons for it, obviously, and financial.
Absolutely. So what I'm sitting with here, and I really love how you're highlighting some things out of your book, because I agree with you. It's a common psychological understanding that all humans have some basic core parts of themselves that are similar across the board. We all share similar things. One of them, for example, is self-consciousness. We have an understanding that we are fragile, for example, that we can be hurt, and because of that, we turn to safety. We turn towards the things that we can feel protected by. And it's a fascinating concept, because what does safety look like for people? And everyone will have their own way of defining what safety is going to feel like. And the second thing that we share in common is we are social creatures, we are social beings, and because of that, and this is both good and bad, we sometimes lend out our own well-being to others, to sometimes judge our sanity, to judge if we're funny, to judge if we're attractive. There's a double-edged sword there, as you can certainly hear. How many of you listeners certainly have grown up, or even if any of you are undergrads listening to this, have grown up even now wondering, am I cute enough? Am I attractive enough? And who do you base it off of? You base it off sometimes your fellow friends and colleagues and whoever else is around you. And it's a very tough double-edged sword, as I refer to there. So It's probably actually, I really do believe that's why so many people turn to social media in one aspect.
Validation, a sense
Because
of
they want to get a sense
comparison.
of where am I?
In the complex
scope.
social network of like our
That's right.
lives. Yeah.
And this is a very commonly
yes.
understood concept across the board. And so when in therapy, we sit in the room with people, and sometimes it's the teasing out of what's yours versus what's your friends,
Mhm.
what's the judgment. And something we push a lot is where we develop from family, culture, society, religion, and these four major influences kind of create this sense of who we are.
Right.
So to the question, I go off topic, y'all. So
No, this is great.
Come back.
I love the free flow conversation.
Oh goodness, yeah,
So,
loose associations, random thought insertion. Yeah. So I say that because ultimately, when I joined the military, I think a part of it was the financial security. You know, being financially insecure growing up, begging for food, panhandling. One part of it was financial, and I think it's very fair to say that we often will find ourselves seeking out things that create safety. So one was financial. Another part of it was probably speaking to what might represent this view of what a Marine would be. Tough, strong, protective, able to
stoic,
to go to war.
Strong, right.
This kind of concept that maybe I was too young to really appreciate what I was really getting into. So another part of it was that this playing into what's quote the masculine that I could be to protect myself, to protect others. And, you know, we can go down this beautiful hole of protecting family and wanting to keep them from harm, but you know, maybe next time, maybe another podcast. So I think that was a major part of it. And then lastly, it actually wasn't until the end of my military career that I then understood more so this idea of tribe or belonging in that sense. That's when it really changed. And not only, by the way, not only did I learn that from the military, I learned that from grad school. I learned a lot more about that from my master's degree program, to be connected and together and be cared for, I suppose.
So I wonder what the link between going from the military, going into graduate school in psychology, getting your PhD. So what was that inspiration? What was that motivation to go into a line of going into professional psychology, clinical psychology?
There is a long story with that, Jay, actually. It's a long story, and part of me is sitting with, one, how much time we have, because there's such great questions here that I'm like, oh, that's a long story.
Like a short,
like
in a nutshell.
In a nutshell, oh gosh, in a nutshell, the nutshell version is the military was an interesting space where you were often told what to do. Going into grad school for psychology, you are asked what you want to do. And so the play on this is very interesting for me in that in the military, again, there's direction, there's order, there's here's what you're going to do, and grad school is a different idea. You can be asked to do more. And so part of me in giving that is acknowledging, I suppose, in light of my life, my background and things I experienced, I wanted to do something that was a little bit able to give back, and particularly to veterans at first. At first, it was giving back to veterans. And so in trying to do that, psychology was easily the best direction to go. It was easily the best direction to go.
Well, this is a good segue because I want to talk about where we are right now in society. You know, this is where it's May, going into May 2021. More of us are getting vaccinated. That's a whole different topic of like vaccine hesitancy. But the point we're at Chapman, we really are grateful to be able to now meet in person and do things because we're getting vaccinated. But COVID took us by surprise. You know, I came into this position as director of wellbeing in February 2020, and you came in to your position in maybe I think 3 or 4 months prior to that.
Correct.
Both of us were hit. When I say hit, with like COVID hits,
That's right.
we're like, you, myself got to know each other. We were working on projects and resources online.
That's right.
Pretty much to turn a dime. But COVID really, I think, both revealed the importance of our mental health. You know, obviously there was the physical component to COVID, but there's now that we're recognizing there's the social, emotional, mental, issues that have come up with it. And so we're all, almost like, can't chomping at the bit to get back into life, but there's a lot of anxiety just around this.
There's a lot.
So, this idea of this re-entry process, or this realignment, if you will, what are some of the, do you see that obviously there are pros, obviously getting back, but there's some challenges. What are some of the challenges that you think you anticipate, like not just with our Chapman students or community, but just maybe getting back into living?
That's a great question. I think everyone's going to give you a different answer.
Mm-hmm.
You go to anyone and say, what's the hardest part about coming back to the world? And they're going to say, traffic.
You're right.
Or they'll go a different direction, which is, can I trust that person? Can I trust that they have really been vaccinated? And can I trust that they're not just saying that? Or even that next step, which is, how do I begin to have conversation with people now?
Mm-hmm.
And that's another fascinating thing that we're coming across is we have, for the last year, been using screens generally to do all of our discussions, and that's fine and all. But now there's some interesting anxieties around, do I even know how to conversate in person anymore?
Mm-hmm.
What do I do with my hands? How do I engage with someone? And there's almost an intimidation that people are starting to talk about, and not knowing, how do I actually, for example, initiate conversation? How do I repair conversation? That's when those natural roles come into conversation. Mm-hmm. And then what am I supposed to say when I leave? There's some elements of like, see you later versus.
I don't hit the leave button on your Zoom screen.
I'm not on mute anymore.
Yes.
And I can't hide behind the yellow thumbs up.
Yeah.
There's a different element of what is the best way to engage. And so, gosh, that's why I say, great question. It's tough to answer.
Is there a strategy or some strategy you can maybe impart to our listeners?
Oh yeah. So the one thing that I will say, because we use this actually with socially anxious people as well, people who experience social anxiety, is one of the major things is we know that people get hypersensitive to their own process. So when someone gets nervous, their attention really drives inward. They really sit with, what's this person thinking about me? Oh goodness, is my shirt correct? Is my shirt long enough? And then you really draw your attention to all the things about your own body.
Yeah.
And when we're dealing with people that are experiencing social anxiety, a lot of it is teaching them to focus more on what the other person is saying. That allows you to pull away from your own self. Now, what's also interesting, and it's something that I think it's important to know is, when we face, exposure therapy, for example, in exposure therapy, a person identifies something that they're afraid of. So in this case, as you can hear, the relationship, maybe engaging with people out in public. And so when they are afraid of engaging bigger with others, there's something that happens. They become fearful, they experience their own anxieties, their body has any number of sensations, and on and on and on. And then what happens is it keeps them away from whatever it is that's causing them fear. The problem with that is you're now creating this behavioral relationship. Something scary, run away. Something scary, run away. But we know very specifically that the way to engage with things that are fearful is to create a stronger, courageous drive towards things. In therapy, it's never about making you less afraid. It's always about making you more courageous. And that's a very interesting spin on things. We have to remember that it's not about making you less fearful. Going out in the world is scary. And one other part with this, which I find so incredible, is we know that the more new experiences a person has, the more areas that they move into that create fear, it activates genes in a different way. It activates the potential of what you could be. And so people right now, everyone listening, it's a weird complex where you are who you are, but you're also who you could be if you challenge yourself. And that's a very interesting kind of conflict. I am who I am, but I'm also this potential. And so being able to push people out to do things that are really hard or difficult or different is going to conjure up a different way of being. But it takes courage.
I like how you frame the positive, like therapy is not about being less afraid, it's about the drive to be more courageous.
That's right. That's right.
And I'll give you a personal example of how I think, in my own journey, all throughout high school, and I think, all throughout college as well, I was very self-conscious. I think it's the part of it is the model minority thing we talked about earlier. But I think, that comparing brain, we're always thinking, gosh, am I really good enough? Am I really that smart enough? Am I really deserving of this? And I say this because after my mother's suicide, it made me re-question and rethink what really is of value, what really is important. Like, I think the goal is for me is how to be more authentic and how to be living a life that is not dictated by the norms or pressures or social ideals of society, but what really is meaningful to you.
Yeah.
I think it's a very important, point for especially students, to be aware of is that, and this doesn't sound cliche, but it's almost like happiness is not these goalposts. Sometimes we have these destinations. I'll be happy when. I'll be happy when I have a college degree. I'll be happy when I get that first job. I'll be happy when I get married and have those kids.
Right.
But we forget about the journey and the process as well.
Right. People live through checklists of their life. The checklist of their life. I have to do this, and then I'll do this, and then I can be happy. I think that's an inappropriate way to treat yourself. I mean, because then there's lack of connection to the things that you do. And I think far too many people, and I really mean it, I think far too many people aim to be happy all the time. And I don't think that's I don't think it's a really realistic goal. When patients come in, they say, I just want to be happy. Part of me just says, well, let's just start with not being bad. Let's have that discussion. What does it mean to not be bad? And then that transforms to, I think you mentioned in there, meaning. It transforms between sort of not being bad to let's identify the difference between happy and meaningful. And there is a difference. I absolutely believe that if we can tune ourselves to something that's meaningful in our lives, that would give us the best idea. And in meaning it, to clarify, I always hold on to this great definition. I believe meaning is an orienting reflex, and it helps us understand and navigate sort of the chaos and order of life. We have this chaos and we have this order. If you want to look at the Tao system, this yin yang kind of perspective that there's this mutual engagement,
harmony, flow,
harmony, absolutely. And in some ways, of course, male, female, of course, the binary ideas of some of these concepts, and one of them, again, order and chaos. I can't help but think as meaning as a drive to give us something. And so we spoke earlier about fear as an example. I think people sometimes are driven by fear to the point where they are crippled by it. They don't know how to move forward, and they can't find where to go in life. And if we can help them orient to what are the things that are going to bring you meaning, sometimes the side effect of seeking meaning would be happiness. Sometimes the side effect of seeking these things would be strength and courage. But the conversation must be had. Well, how are we going to define this for that? And every person has to figure it out on their own.
Yeah. Well, we talk about this idea of what's going on right now, not in addition to the challenges that I think many of us are going to be facing with this re-entry rehumanization process. A lot of us have experienced in genuine grief, loss, and to some extent, myself included, some issues around our mental health.
Yeah.
I came across this really great article a few days ago in the New York Times. There's this new concept called, what many of us are experiencing, it's not true, authentic clinical depression, or it's not, it's somewhere in between, this idea of languishing. Yeah. It's a word which I think it's so, I'll read this to you. There's an article in the New York Times that talks about the state of languishing. It comes from a psychologist who I think I coined the term, And the idea of languishing, I'm going to read this quote.
Mhm.
It's the void between depression and flourishing. Languishing is not merely in our heads, it's in our circumstances. You can't heal a sick culture with personal bandages.
Mhm.
We still live in a world that normalizes physical health challenges, but stigmatizes mental health challenges. As we head into a new post-pandemic reality, it's time to rethink our understanding of mental health and well-being. Not depressed doesn't mean you're not struggling.
Mhm.
Not burnt out doesn't mean you're fired up. By acknowledging that so many of us are languishing, we can start giving voice to quiet despair and lighting a path out of the void.
That's really nice.
Yeah.
By the way, that's well said.
Yeah, I mean, it was actually written in a New York Times article. I can post it for the listeners. But this idea of I actually, when I heard that term language, I'm like, this actually sounds like what I've been experiencing. It's almost like this idea of looking through life, through a foggy windshield in some way. I can see it, but it's still oh, it's still so foggy. Do you think this is a valid condition? I don't know if condition is the right word, an experience that can you maybe talk more about this idea of how do you feel that we have been languishing in some way?
I'm reflecting on that. I like the way we can maybe sit with the language of what depression is and kind of move it a little bit. I agree. I don't think we're seeing, quote, classic depression. Yeah. I think we're seeing something a little bit different. And so as I'm reflecting, I'm sitting with student cases and I'm sitting with the patients as a whole. So let me throw out some things that are coming to mind. So I'm sitting with students and patients that have said, it just feels like, to your point, it just feels like life is happening to me versus me choosing life. It feels as if, I'm the photographer at the party, but not in the party.
Great analogy, great metaphor, yeah.
And part of me, as I listen to that, I'm thinking that's a very interesting way to put this, what I might say is this complex, this experience that a person is starting to have right now. And I think it's a valid one. It's something that I think we need to open up. And the next step is going to be, how is this going to affect the human psychology moving forward? We're in an evolution right now of how to engage with the world. I mean, we've been in evolutions, therapeutically, mind you. One of our earliest schools of thought were around psychodynamic practices. Very much so. Blame your mom, blame your dad for everything, and let's talk about your dreams. Great. First big wave. And the second big wave was behavioralism and cognitive therapies. They had their place, and forgive me, again, I'm not trying to say one is greater than the other, but the second evolution that we've seen more so was evidence-based practice. Everyone is a formula. You just got to give them these certain things and they'll get better. And that dehumanizes people. Yes. In my opinion, of course. Yes, I know for those of you who are evidence-based practitioners, I get it. We're good. Okay. The third wave that we're seeing right now is mindfulness practice. That's the big third wave that's come through. And it's still making its movement, but now we're getting into the fourth wave or evolution of psychology, where we're looking at models of delivery, but not just models of delivery, but who we project out into the world, whether through computer or through social engagement. How do we start to define these things differently? Where it's not major depression, but perhaps it could be languishing. And so now there's this conversation about how is technology going to change us? How is it going to move us? What's the impact of digital projection of personality across the world, across people, and how does it influence who we are with others? So really valid things, and that's our next wave. Yeah.
No, I like this, and I think maybe as we kind of get wrapped up over here, languishing, I think really is this interesting term. I always get fascinated by semantics and word and things. But in this article, this New York Times article, they actually looked at people who back in Europe, back in the early start of the pandemic in 2020, and they really, I don't know if diagnosis is the right word, but they really kind of thought these people we were languishing. It wasn't clinical depression, like hard like, the real, like, models of depression that we see, it wasn't quite the state of thriving or flourishing. It was somewhere in the middle. So languishing is the middle step, is the middle child, if you will, in clinical psychology. But what they notice is that these people who in spring of 2020 were languishing are now the ones who are having the mental health issues. So we're, so you, because we're in the same field of, health and, well-being. I wonder if this could be like anticipating this next tsunami of mental health, we're as we get back into rehumanization, re-entry. And I like how you kind of phrased, we're in this fourth wave now, kind of looking at models of like, the psyche and who we are.
That's right.
What do you anticipate is going to happen, I think, maybe for here at Chapman in your role as director of psychological counseling services? Like it's hard of a crystal ball, obviously.
Yeah, that is
but
a tough
like,
question.
how do you think our students are going to I think manage being back after 15, almost 18 months away?
God, do you have any easy questions, Shay?
Yeah.
Just, your favorite food or something like that. How are we going to do that? How are we going to do that? Okay, so.
And speaking more so in your director role.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so first, I want to be mindful of the necessity to look at language and better classify things. So, for example, we're talking about the difference between, say, major depression, languishment, as I'm kind of using that word against an interesting concept, trauma, and let's even play in that world of trauma. Trauma is this, it's thrown around often, but the research that I've been involved in has tried to categorize trauma differently. There's such a thing as, say, cultural trauma, spiritual trauma, racial trauma, certainly. And when we look at these things, our greater ability to maybe sometimes specify what we're looking at, it helps to identify a person differently, helps them to feel like they can connect to something that speaks to them. What I like about Chapman students as a whole, because of the community and the way it is, there's a lot of movement towards using your voice in a way that pushes change. A number of students, well, first, they're all so brilliant. There's so many brilliant students here, and they want to help. That's the bottom line. They want to help. They want to engage. They want to be part of it. And out of our office, we often run across students that just say, I feel like I need to do more, but I don't know what to do. And so I think just that very element, we are a small population. Those who use our office, they're a small population of a greater existent archetype, I suppose that's what I put it. This wanting to help, support, care for others, to reflect. And so I think the students at Chapman, they can make waves here. And I think they can influence change in so many different ways. The university, I really do believe, has done what it can to support critical thought, to support movement in certain ways, and to try and support some of the things that are happening. The fact that the university funds a psychological center, gives them autonomy to work with students, everything's confidential, they don't have to know anything, automatically tells me that there's something that the university recognizes, which is mental health is important, and people could seek out whatever help that they may need. And I think that says a lot. So where are we going? Gosh, where are we going? Technology is going to move people. Technology and telemedicine. We have therapists that work from 8 a.m. till 10 p.m. Almost 7 days a week. Wow. And the access has been so important. Students can come to us on the weekends. We run music and art therapy groups on the weekends. We have been able to provide services over the internet in a way that was responsive and quick, and students are using it. Therapy doesn't necessarily just have to take place in a cushy office anymore. Therapy is going to be in life. And I think the evolution that we're going is, how can we integrate mental health well-being into our everyday life? Right. And so where would I like to see us? And where do I plan to send us, I expect to see some of my therapists walking the grounds here at Chapman and engaging with students differently.
Nice. I like
I
that.
expect to see them hosting a little bit more open forums and talking about mental health across the board. I expect to see a therapist coming out and hanging out and making it okay to just go up and just say hello to somebody. And walking the track with somebody.
So be out in the campus community.
That's right. Yeah. That's right. It doesn't have to be so holed up and hidden, and there's space for that. Yeah. We are going to have that, absolutely. But in other cases, it's time to integrate mental health into the overall community, and that's the way to do that.
I love that idea, and I think the work that you do. Once you as the director, but everyone at the
it's all my team.
SPCS, right?
It's not me. It's the therapist.
So
really.
For those who are at Chapman, there are many resources. One of which is the Student Psychological Counseling Services. There's the website for that they can go to. Is there just a generic email or a phone number? Like I said, what is that?
Just info I'm sorry, it's spcs@chapman.edu. So for any information, anything you may need,
Yeah, and there's also the Fish Interface Center. We work closely with SPCS and with Dr. Kami.
And do excellent work, by the way. We've had multiple students come in and give praise for the work that's being done here at Fish.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. And so we also have some other resources. There's the Chapman Hope webpage here at the Fish Interface Center. And there's the Chapman Health and Wellness website, which has resources as well. But I think, this is a nice way to maybe ask one more final question. What is something you do yourself to take care of your mental health?
Oh, good one. Okay, good one. See, that was an easier question. I knew there was easier questions.
And with a nice one, the soft one.
Okay. So I'm going to talk about things not only that I do, that I give permission to do for people to do regularly. So what do I do for myself? Number one is I breathe. Let's just start there. I will regularly, and sometimes people mistake me just breathing as being annoyed or feeling like they're boring, when instead breathing for me is just a moment to kind of check in and kind of ground myself. And I don't think people give enough attention. It's just taking a moment, breathing in, sitting with it, reflecting, and moving on. So number one, I breathe regularly whenever I start to feel a little bit tense during the day. That's number one. Secondly, like other people, I sometimes zone out in front of me. So baseball is what I zone out with. Watching baseball. Oh no, I could not exercise. This is not a yoga body. This is not a no. I am a sit down and watch baseball, have it kind of go on in the background. I think baseball is a beautiful metaphor for life.
Yes,
we can talk about that so I enjoy doing that. I am so lucky to have a wonderful family, by the way. We didn't get into that too much, but my goodness, they are the best thing ever. They are the greatest support system as anything could be. And as I mentioned before, art, love art. I do ride my motorcycle pretty regularly, and just love getting out on the road in that way. So there are so many things. You know what, Jay, what's so fascinating is sometimes those things don't help me. And I want to be very clear. Sometimes they help me, and sometimes they don't help me. And that's okay, because that forces me to then find something else that I can do for myself. There doesn't have to be a one thing that always does it. No, you can always find things that do it for you. And I think that's important.
Well, with that, we want everyone here to know, our listeners, that your mental health is important to us. This is why we're doing this 4-part series from Healthy Brain, Healthy Mind. If you are in need of support, please reach out to the students, if you're here on campus, that is, at part of Chapman, the Student Psychological Counseling Services. Reach out to us at the Fish Interface Center. And if you are just struggling in general, there are resources available to you, hotlines, suicide hotlines, and others you can maybe just share with our students.
SPCS also has drop-in hours.
Drop-in hours,
every day
perfect.
of the week.
Yeah.
So it can be you, it can be a staff member, a faculty member. Anyone can just drop in, ask a question, get some support, talk to them about something, get signed up for services. It's an open opportunity to have a therapist on the other side. You just log on to Zoom, very easy. And if you're not let in immediately, they might be finishing up with somebody, and then they'll let you in as soon as they're done. And we have multiple therapists that are on the Zoom at the same time. So they'll be able to reach out and ask for support.
Excellent, excellent. Well, thank you, Andrew, Dr. Kami, for being here as our first guest on this podcast series. And for those of you who would like to learn more about this, we'll be posting the podcast will be available on SoundCloud, but also the Fish Interface Center Facebook and social media pages, as well as on Chapman's social media pages. And if you want to watch the longer video to this, you can also on our Fish Interface Center Facebook page. We posting them there as well. In our next, our second interview, our second podcast in the series will be with Dr. Manjari Murali, who is a professor in Korean College in Health Sciences, and she'll be talking about how meditation builds a better brain.
Oh man, that's a good one. You should have started with her. That's a good one.
Well, thank you, Doc. Thank you, Andrew, for being here. And we are delighted to have you here, not only at Chapman as a resource, but also to be here for the Healthy Brain, Healthy Mind podcast.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. Such a pleasure.
You're welcome.